meeting of cultures, minds, and hearts. Welcome to a celebration of love. Today is a good day. My name is Sian Cameron, and it gives me great pleasure to be leading Elinor and Brian's wedding ceremony today. I am a wedding and naming celebrant trained and accredited by Humanists UK. During this ceremony, you will hear about why Brian and Elinor have decided to get married, their story so far as a couple, and a lovely reading in Welsh. You will also hear their vows that they have written for one another and be witness to their exchanging of rings. At the end of the ceremony, you will all be invited to join them together as husband and wife. So yes, there will be some audience participation. Are you ready? So today, Elinor and Brian have invited you, the people they hold most dear, to this beautiful place to share in a celebration of their love for one another. As the people who have guided them and supported them through various stages of their lives, it is of utmost importance to them that you are able to join them here today. In this Humanist ceremony, we celebrate first and foremost Elinor and Brian's love for one another, but also celebrate this wonderful meeting of cultures, kindness and respect for one another, and fully embrace the theme of equality that Elinor and Brian hold very dear to them. Everyone is welcome here. How lucky we are to be in this beautiful venue, Elinor's home that she grew up in, a welcoming and nurturing environment in the heart of nature. Brian and Elinor would like to express how grateful they are to Elinor's mum, Carol, for holding the wedding here in her home. They know how hard she's worked, especially in the garden, to make it possible for them to hold their celebration here. Eve and Brian, self-confessed city boy, was made to feel welcome here the first time he visited. It did take him a little longer than he thought it would to get here on the infamous Aberystwyth train that splits at McDonald. And he does still find the quietness here somewhat unsettling at times and can't quite get used to the sheep waking him up in the morning. And maybe some of you have had similar experiences getting here today. Some of you have travelled enormous distances, I know, from Australia, Kenya, Dubai, Belgium, Spain, and even London. Elinor and Brian would like to thank you all so much for travelling here today and making such a special effort to be part of their celebrations. Also a big thank you, although they've disappeared, to Cor Meibion Aberystwyth, and of course the wonderful singer Eve Goodman here, who was singing Dacwn Hariad as Elinor and her bridal party walked down the aisle. So beautiful, such lovely music, thank you. And we're looking forward to hearing more of them a bit later on. So Brian and Elinor would also like to take the opportunity to mention Elinor's 91-year-old great aunt Evelyn, whom they're delighted is here to join us today. She holds a special place in their hearts as someone who's been a great inspiration to them. Having travelled the world, she shares many of her ideals and welcomed Brian wholeheartedly the first time they met, providing him with his first experience of getting drunk on sherry. So, a warm welcome to you, great aunt Evelyn. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. Brian have known each other for quite some time now, and some of you may be thinking, oh, they're getting married at last, and some of you may be wondering why they feel the need to get married after all this time. Well, Brian and Elinor have decided that marriage is the perfect way to cement their relationship together forever. They see marriage as an equal partnership and want their friends and family to share in this commitment they're making to one another today. They've learned to look to one another for support, trust one another, be fair to one another, and always think of the other person when making a decision. They understand the importance of communication, to always tell each other how they feel, and to never keep their emotions or challenges to themselves. They always try to make time for each other and remember to have quality time together. Elinor looks forward to Brian always saying, "Morning, beautiful," and growing old together, and they know how to chat and laugh and just have fun. Throughout their time together, especially latterly, they feel that they don't really need much in life. Having travelled far and wide, endured the experience of moving abroad together, living in a hotel with just a suitcase, they've learned that if we just have each other and a few clean clothes, we're okay. So, Elinor and Brian's story began at the most romantic of venues, in a McDonald in Oxford. Who would have thought that love could be forged next to a ketchup pump? And yet, here we are today. As it happens, neither Brian nor Elinor were big fans of Mackie D's, and Brian's unfamiliarity with the menu provided Elinor with the opportunity to guide him through it. They bonded over their mutual dislike of mayo and cheese, and eventually ordered the same culinary delight, a chicken wrap. Elinor described how they spoke for ages as if they were old friends, and that Brian even opened up to her that he'd just come back from his Erasmus in Sweden, he'd gained a few pounds, and he was on a running regime. Brian said he remembers being so comfortable around Elinor that he basically told her his whole life story. He loved her hair, of course, and thought she was one of the most beautiful and happy people he'd ever met. He said she was so receptive to the world and seeing it all, as was I. Their first official date was a few months later in London, a kind of midway point between Oxford and Brian's undergrad uni of Essex. Brian travelled to London after a fresher night, and Elinor remembers that when she met up with him, you could definitely smell that that's where he'd been. She gave him 10 out of 10 for effort, as he had clearly only had about 2 hours sleep, if that. So, well done. It was actually quite a while that day before they did meet up in London. They planned to meet at that tiny venue known as Victoria Station, and surprisingly discovered there were definitely more than one Pret and Starbucks. Mild panic ensued on Elinor's part, and she eventually texted her friend to say how Brian was probably annoyed with her by now because she couldn't find him. Luckily, this text actually went to Brian, and eventually they did manage to find him. So it was all good. After this slight hiccup, love definitely started to blossom as they spent the day together, getting to know each other, walking around London for hours, and having lunch at the Embankment, where they went 50-50, a sign of their relationship to come. Despite managing to walk straight into an English Defence League march, they had a wonderful time. Brian said that the day's adventures confirmed to him she was the one, and the deal was sealed for the kiss. Oh. Elinor saw how sweet and caring Brian was, missing his bus home to ensure that she got safely on hers. Since their first encounters back in 2011, Elinor and Brian have continued on their adventures and spent most of their 20s together. They've journeyed from studentship to proper first employment, buying a house and travelling together, not to mention moving to Dubai and extending a business during a pandemic. Elinor and Brian do not do things by halves, I'm sure you'll agree. In 2018, Brian decided it was time to pop the question and planned to do it on their trip to LA. But logistically it didn't work out because the ring wasn't ready. So it seems that actually Elinor had an inkling that something was going on and thought there might be a bit of a proposal on her birthday. She thought, yeah, my birthday, that's going to be the day. Brian Brian decided that was too obvious, and he kept her waiting just a little bit longer. They planned a trip to Paris just a few days after her birthday, and Brian knew exactly the right time and place to do it. When they lived in a studio apartment in Euston, and Elinor was working her first job, but not the best pay, and Brian was studying for his master's and law degrees, they used to walk past CC's champagne bar at St Pancras and say, "Oh, one day we'll go there, one day." So, Brian got this. On their way to Paris via the Eurostar, Brian encouraged Elinor to go into CSU's with him before they got on the train. And Elinor was somewhat annoyed by this because she hasn't got a travel snacks. And so Brian agreed that she could go and get those and join him there, which is what she did. So having coordinated with the bar not to give the game away, Elinor arrived back, snacks in hand, and she was mid-selfie when Brian went down on one knee. And people around them thought that this might be the start of some big flash mob extravaganza, as it was also the weekend of Harry and Meghan's wedding. So the themes of love and partying were definitely in the air. When Elinor finally worked out what was happening, she was completely delighted, over the moon, and of course she immediately said yes. And she couldn't stop looking at her ring the whole time they went to Paris. Despite being really nervous, Brian's fears were finally allayed when she agreed, and everyone else in the bar seemed pretty chuffed too. They were met with rapturous applause. Brian described how they spent a magical weekend away in Paris, and he described it as one of the happiest memories of his life. Yeah, Elinor can't really remember how they got to Paris, as she was too busy staring at her ring. A good job, Chief Navigator Brian was there on hand to make sure she got on the right train. So now that we have finally arrived at Brian and Elinor's special day, it's quite fun to ask them questions like, are there any things that one of you is better at than the other? Is there anything you feel that you've learned from your fiancé? Anything you feel cemented your relationship or challenged you? And what do you love most about the other person? So what was most interesting is that when I looked at their answers and then probed them a bit further, what was actually most noticeable to me was how much they were just on the same page. Both of them spoke about the challenges of moving to a new country, starting everything all over again, the stress caused by that, and how supporting each other through that not only brought them closer together, but made them feel ready for anything, as long as they're together. They're definitely not carbon copies of one another, but their qualities certainly complement one another, and well, it just works. Elinor's the early riser, whereas Brian hates mornings. He'd much rather stay up late to work. Brian takes the title of champion ironer. Yeah. But he is a bit of a fusspot, apparently, when it comes to food. I don't know if any of you have experienced this. Elinor will try just about anything, and she always encourages Brian to try new foods, but only if she thinks that he will like it. So, a cheap taster. Brian has managed to sway Elinor over to becoming an Arsenal fan, which I think is no mean feat. And now classes this as a shared interest of theirs. However, he cannot persuade her to be enthusiastic about FIFA or PlayStation. Brian is prepared to completely put his trust in Elinor when it comes to decision making. She told him he would like living in Dubai, and she thought he should take a job there, and so he did. Their shared interests obviously include travelling, but to travel the way they want to, avoiding tour groups and must-see spots. They prefer to find their own way around and immerse themselves in the culture of the place they're visiting. Brian feels that he's learned from Elinor to be better with people, travel, and food. He thinks Elinor is great at negotiating and haggling, which comes in very handy in Dubai. She's also taught him how to be more romantic and spontaneous. Elinor says that Brian has taught her to be calmer in situations situations where she would not usually be so calm and collected. He's encouraged her to actually wear her new clothes and not always save them for an occasion that she doesn't have. They've both learned more about each other's cultures and love mixing both their cultures together to make their own. They cook Welsh and Swahili food with their own twist and how they like it. And Elinor loves how Brian reads all the newspapers, researches into every story, and then reports back to her so that she can learn about them too. To conclude Elinor and Brian's journey so far, it's time to share what they really think of each other and what they love about one another the most. Elinor describes Brian as being kind, strong, independent, introverted, and someone who knows their own mind, not swayed by what other people might think. She knows that he is loving and loyal. Brian also describes Elinor's kindness, as well as being curious, open, a good friend, loving and responsible. He knows she is a really good leader and sees other people looking to her to hold up the standard. Elinor said that one of the things she loves most about Brian is that he calms me down when I get stressed and head up. No matter what I need, he will always try and do his best to get it for me. He always celebrates my success. He's been her greatest support throughout lockdown, while she turned their one-bed flat into a warehouse, helping with packing orders, filming content, marketing, as well as doing his own job. And she said even though we didn't have a table to eat on or room for anything else, he didn't complain and supported me throughout. Brian said, I love the way she sees the world and has this wonderful natural curiosity about places and cultures. She's far more open to trying new things wherever we go. I also love the fact that she's great with people, because I can be introverted sometimes and I need her to bail me out. These two lovebirds are obviously made for each other. They clearly complement each other perfectly and flock together like birds of a feather, no matter where life's journey takes them. So before they make their vows, they would now like to invite their friend Angharad to read the beautiful, famous Welsh poem, Mi gerddaf gyda thi, which describes how I will walk with you through whatever comes. And the author is anonymous.
Mi gerddaf gyda chi dros lwybrau maith, a blodau can a breuddwyd ar ein taith. I llygais sylla fi a dal dy law, mi gerddaf gyda thi byth bynnag ddaw. Mi gerddaf gyda thi pan fydd y lloer fel llusern yn y nen ar noson oer. A ddawaf i ti'n galon i'r llwyr, mi gerddaf gyda thi drwy oriau'r hwyr.
We now come to the central part of the ceremony, where Elinor and Brian will make their vows to one another. These words have been thought about very carefully over many months and reflect the care and respect they always show for one another. So if you two would like to